Good morning, students. So today's class we will study about minerals, and in this class we will cover both the micro minerals and macro minerals. And the first part of the talk we will cover the macro minerals. So what are these minerals? So these minerals are inorganic elemental atoms. They are essential nutrients, but upon digestion, they usually don't get changed, unlike other kinds of biomolecules such as carbohydrates. So they get broken down, and but here in these are inorganic elemental atoms that are essential nutrients, but they don't get changed upon digestion or metabolism. And they some of them they are very crucial for the activity of certain enzymes which participates in the metabolic processes. So they serve as very good cofactors here. So, and also some of them have structural functions such as the we know that calcium and phosphate, they are involved in the bone health, whereas sulfur is involved in the keratin. They also serve as to maintain the acid-base balance and the water balance, such as the sodium, potassium, chlorine, etc. So they are important for maintaining the acid-base balance. Some of these minerals, such as sodium, potassium, and calcium, they also are important in the nerve impulses and for the muscle function, for contraction and relaxation of the muscles. So they play important role. So they have also unique functions such as um, in heme, iron plays a very important role. In vitamin B12, cobalamin is present. So iodine is important for thyroid hormones. Similarly, they have very important functions. So the major of these minerals, so they are divided into two parts. So one is the micro minerals, which are needed in amounts more than 100 mg per uh, per day. So they are such as calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, sodium, chloride, potassium. These are all macro minerals which are needed in larger amounts and which are needed in amounts more than 100 mgs. So the bioavailability of these minerals is influenced by various factors such as genetics, aging, nutritional status, absorption, how they are absorbed in the large and the small intestine, and how they are absorbed by the kidneys or they are excreted out by the kidneys and the small intestine. So like I said, we classify these minerals into macro minerals or major minerals and micro minerals and trace elements we call. So if you look at the macro minerals or the major minerals, so if you look at the body tissues, their concentration ranges more than 50 mg per kilogram of the body weight of the tissue. So that means their amounts is about 50 parts per million, 50 ppm. So the examples of these includes sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, phosphorus, chloride, sulfur are the examples of this. Whereas the micro minerals or the trace elements are needed in relatively lesser amounts than the major minerals, and these are present in the tissues, body tissues at the concentration of less than 50 mg per kilogram of the tissue. So that means they are present in less than 50 parts per million in the body tissues. And the examples are iron, cobalt, chromium, manganese, copper, molybdenum, fluoride, iodine, selenium, arsenic, nickel. So these are the examples of the trace elements. So if you look carefully, the amounts present in the body tissues, if you see these calcium, phosphate, potassium, all these are present in the gram amounts. Sodium, chloride, sulfur, and magnesium, all of them are present in gram per kilogram amounts. Whereas if you look at the trace elements, they are present in the milligram amounts per kilogram of the body weight. So these are found in uh, reliably found in various both the animal sources of food and as well as the plant sources of food. But often there are other substances which are present in the food and they may decrease its bioavailability. So for example, the oxalates which are present in the green leafy vegetables such as spinach, they prevent the absorption of most of the calcium in the spinach. So they complex with these and they don't allow them to be available by during the absorption process. And also the phytates form of the phosphorus in most plants make it poorly available. So there are various factors which affect the requirements. So also it is found that there are these minerals can interact with each other. For example, sodium and chloride. We take the common salt where they are always present together. Similarly, the calcium and phosphorus, they are important components of the bone. So these can complex with each other as well, and that's why their availability may vary. So also there are factors which are affecting the requirements. For example, like I said, the physiological state of the body. For what? So for example, the athletes may require different amounts as compared to the normal person. So the interactions with other minerals also plays major role, and the tissue storage and the form in which they are available. They are available in inorganic form or organic form. So they may also change the status of their bioavailability or the requirement. For example, the sodium is can be the selenite may be present with sodium. It may be present in as sodium selenite or sodium selenate or selenomethionine. So these are various forms which can be present in the body which may alter its availability. So the most minerals have an optimal range below which they may lead to deficiencies, or if they are present in more amounts, they may lead to toxicity. Also, the plants where they're growing may also determine the soil has what kind of minerals, and thereby the grains which we eat or the vegetables which we eat may also have either more amount of those minerals or less amount of those minerals. So you can see here the various elements such as copper, cobalt, the iodine and selenium. So they are usually required in a given amounts, but the body can tolerate up to um, up to very high levels. So for example, the requirement for copper for cattle is 5 to 8 mg per kilogram body weight. It can tolerate um, up to 25-fold more amounts, which is about 115 mg per kilogram body weight. Whereas, so similarly, for the cobalt, for the cattle, it is required in 0.06 mg per kilogram weight. It can tolerate up to 1,000-fold more amounts, up to 60 mg per kilogram body weight. So the first mineral which we are covering in today's class is calcium. So calcium is most abundant mineral which is present in the animal tissue. So we see them majorly in the skeletal system. 99% of the calcium is present in the bones, and also it is present in the other tissues such as blood, and during the muscle contraction it is important, and it is important in the neuronal function, it is important in the blood clotting, it is important in the various cellular metabolic processes. So what are the different forms of calcium? So most of the calcium in the body exists in the hydroxyapatite form. So the calcium is present in the plasma. About 45% is present in the ionized form, which is the physiologically active form, and the other 45% could be bound with various proteins in the serum or in the plasma, which is predominantly the albumin, and 10% can complex with other minerals, and making, for example, sulfates, phosphates, citrate. So they can also complex with other types of anions. So if you look uh, this picture, so in the extracellular fluid, the cells may have up to 13,000 milligram of calcium, whereas the extracellular fluid can have 10-fold lesser than the cells, and thereby this can be distributed, and either they should be absorbed or secreted out may change on upon the intake of the calcium in the body. So we take up to 350 mg per day, which can be required, but this can be either absorbed in the extracellular fluid, or later it can go into the cell, or it can be deposited upon in the bone, where its concentration is about um, 1 million mg. So based upon the requirement, upon the intake of the calcium, it can be either reabsorbed through the kidneys, or it can be filtered out and it can go out in the form of a urine or feces. So there are four mechanisms for elimination of calcium from the cytoplasm, and majorly this depends upon the calcium ATPase mediated pumping. So this can be the extracellular space. The first one is the calcium ATPase mediated pumping, and this can be in the extracellular space or through the endoplasmic reticulum and the iron driven transport, or it can be again due to the calcium sodium exchangers, or through the mitochondria. So the mitochondrial calcium uniporters can also play a major role in elimination of the calcium from the cytoplasm. So the food sources it can be the good food sources could be the green leafy vegetables, but again, like I mentioned before, there are certain elements which the oxalates can complex with the calcium and make calcium oxalates. And the fish is also a very good source along with the milk and the dairy products. So the calcium, it's present, both the calcium and phosphate are required for the bone formation and the other non-skeletal functions. So the dietary ratio should be maintained is either 1:1 of calcium phosphate, or 2:1 of the calcium and the phosphate are good for most of the animals. But in case of hens, this ratio, the calcium versus the non-phytate phosphorus ratio, should be 13:1, because the egg shells require majority of this calcium. So the absorption takes place majorly in the duodenum part, and against the concentration gradient, and the absorption requires the calcium protein, the carrier protein, which is the calcium dependent ATPase. And the increased absorption takes place due to the calcitriol, which is the active form of vitamin D, or parathyroid hormone may regulate the increased absorption, or the acidic pH, or the lysine and the arginine amino acids may lead to increase in the absorption, whereas inhibition in the absorption could be due to the oxalates, because it forms the calcium oxalates, or the phytates, or the phosphates, magnesium, or intake of too much caffeine can affect the calcium absorption. So the calcium absorption is dependent on vitamin D and the calcium binding protein in the intestinal epithelial. The absorption depends on the need, maybe during the growth or pregnancy or lactation, the absorption is more. And the bioavailability, like I said, can be decreased by the phytates in the grain or oxalates in the green leafy vegetables, or due to the low estrogen levels in the postmenopausal woman. So the plasma calcium is regulated variably, because the normal plasma concentration is about 8 to 12 mg per deciliter. So there are three hormones which are majorly involved in the regulation: the vitamin D3 from the kidney, and the parathyroid hormone from the parathyroid gland, or the calcitonin from the thyroid gland. So the parathyroid hormone and vitamin D3, they can act to increase the plasma calcium, whereas the calcitonin from the thyroid gland can decrease the plasma calcium. So the parathyroid hormone, which is released in response to low blood calcium stimulates the conversion of inactive form of vitamin D to calcitriol, which I spoke in the vitamins as well, and the increase in the blood calcium which takes place in the small intestine due to the reabsorption also at the kidneys from the blood, and they reduce the wastage in the urine. So this picture shows the regulation of calcium homeostasis. Herein, the calcium is the levels are maintained all through in the body, but if there are high blood calcium levels in the body, so then the thyroid gland secretes the calcitonin. This calcitonin leads to increased this increased calcitonin leads to decreased calcium absorption in the small intestine, and there is a decreased this here bone breakdown and the increased calcium excretion in the urine, and due to the increased excretion in the urine the blood levels of calcium returns to the normal. Whereas in case of low blood calcium, the parathyroid glands release the parathyroid hormone, and the parathyroid stimulates the conversion of the inactive vitamin D to the active vitamin D3, which is 25 hydroxy D3 to 125 dihydroxy vitamin D3, which is calcitriol in the kidneys. So this calcitriol and the parathyroid hormone together stimulates the increased calcium absorption in the small intestine, increased bone breakdown, decreased calcium excretion in the urine, thereby the blood calcium returns to the normal, and thereby the homeostasis in the body is maintained. So like I said before, also in case of vitamin D, so there are, due to calcium deficiencies, two kinds of conditions arise: rickets in the growing animals or osteomalacia in the adults. Or there can be other conditions such as the parturient paresis, which is a milk fever in the lactating animals. So the calcium is important for the bone growth and is greatest during the linear growth phase, and around at 30 years of age it peaks out. So that maximum bone deposition of calcium takes place at the age 30 in both men and women. The calcium is used as a reservoir for other needs to maintain the blood calcium homeostasis. So at the age of 40, there is a bone breakdown of the calcium starts happening, and then the formation of the new bones. So ideally, we want a very high bone mass when this begins. So at the age of 50, almost 50% of the bone mass is degraded. You can see this picture. So this is a healthy bone mass in the early 30s to 40 years, and this is around 65 years. About 50% of this bone mass is lost. So this is the green graph is reflecting the males, the calcium, the peak bone mass in the in case of male, and the red one reflecting the females. And this around 30 to 40 years, this is the peak most period of the peak bone mass. So the adequate calcium and vitamin D intake should be maintained, or by intake of supplements, and one has to perform weight bearing exercises. And in case of women, sometimes they take estrogen supplements to maintain, because estrogen, prolactin and growth hormone, all of them stimulates the 1-alpha hydroxylase, and thus it increases the calcium absorption during pregnancy and the lactation period along with growth phase. So you can see the body requirement with the age at 1 to 3 years, about 500 mg is calcium is required, but after 50 years of age require about 1500 mg. So the bones, they have both osteoblasts, which they help in the bone formation, and osteoclasts, which are the products of breakdown of the older bone, and the hydroxyapatite, which are the large crystal-like molecules which are present in the bone and the teeth. So this calcium stimulates the blood clotting. It helps in the muscle contractions, transmission of nerve impulses, vision, regulation of blood glucose, cell differentiation, cofactors for the energy metabolism. So the reduced risk of chronic disease. We should more they can be also this can also impact the heart diseases by lowering the blood pressure, or the cancers such as breast cancer, prostate, and colon, which are related to various hormonal regulations. So the toxicity can happen due to deposition of calcium in the softer tissues, and due to the impaired kidney function where the absorption and the excretion is impaired, and they can be interfaced with the other nutrients such as iron and the zinc. The next is the phosphorus. So phosphorus is very similar to the calcium, and it is important in the energy metabolism, particularly the adenosine triphosphate ATP, which gives rise to energy, or sugar phosphates, or the phosphoproteins. So the deficiency of phosphorus also includes rickets and osteomalacia, and uh, in case of some animals, the depraved appetite, or pica, wherein chewing of wood or the bones is seen, and the low fertility and the poor milk production are also due to the deficiencies of this. So, so the requirements are being lowered without any negative effects on the reproduction or the milk production, and the bioavailability could be improved if the phytate, because it can complex with the phosphate, and these are present in the grains. The phosphate is a very important component of the phospholipids, which is a component of cell membranes and cell walls. They are found in all the foods. They are structural and functional. They have structural and functional roles in the body and the energy metabolism. So in the small intestine, the regulation of the phosphorus in the body is mostly maintained. They are dependent upon the vitamin D by active transport or the simple diffusion, or their concentrations can be controlled, like I said, in case of calcium by calcitriol, parathyroid hormone, and the calcitonin. So the functions of phosphorus are their important component of DNA and RNA, ATP, the phospholipids. They're important in protein synthesis by phosphorylation of proteins, the energy metabolism. They maintain the blood pH, and they form hydroxyapatite. The phosphorus toxicity is lead because of their deposition in the softer tissues. Sodium, then third one is the sodium. It is absolutely essential nutrient, but people give them the demon status because, like cholesterol, it is not good for health. So typical intakes may vary higher, the way higher than what is needed by the humans. So most of the people take in larger amounts, or they are added to the livestock diets in order to get enough in amount. So the body usually get rid of excess quite easily by excretion in the urine. So the important function is they maintain the osmotic balance and the acid-base balance of the body fluids. So this is a major cation of the extracellular fluids, and they are important in nerve transmission, the transport and the absorption of sugars and the amino acids. So the high blood sodium is associated with the high blood pressure and the increased risk of heart diseases. However, the high blood sodium is rarely due to the dietary excess, and there could be also genetic factors which can be involved. So the commonly it is found together in the foods, and they join via the ionic bonds with the chloride, and making sodium chloride, which is the salt, and these are added during the food processing, cooking a meal. And uh, there are various definitions of the sodium, and one is salt-free conditions, wherein the sodium intake is less than 5 mg sodium per serving, which is called salt-free. We call it. The second one is the very low sodium, means when we consume less than 35 mg sodium per serving, or low salt conditions when we have less than 140 mg sodium per serving. So mostly we get these sodium from the table salt, which is the common salt, or from monosodium glutamate. which is a taste enhancer in many foods. In many restaurants they use. The highly processed foods also contain as a storage. For long-term storage they use a lot of sodium chloride. The condiments, some meats and the dairy products add this additionally to their food. The poultry and the seafood, we get a lot of it, and the bioavailability is affected by the malabsorption. So the regulation and of sodium and chloride both happens in the small intestine. The sodium is absorbed first, and later the chloride is absorbed secondly. So the sodium can also share the transporters along with glucose. So there are glucose sodium transporters in the on the cell surface, wherein the glucose and the sodium can move in and out. Also, they are actively absorbed in the colon during the water absorption. So how this sodium is maintained? This picture shows how the sodium homeostasis is maintained in the body. So in the normal conditions, in the healthy individual, the sodium homeostasis is achieved, but when there is a high level of sodium, then the adrenal glands which are present above the kidneys, they decrease the secretion of aldosterone. So this low aldosterone levels, they favor increased sodium excretion in the urine, and uh, due to this increased excretion, the blood sodium levels return to normal. Or in case of when the blood sodium levels goes down, so that means low blood pressure can also stimulate the aldosterone secretion via the renin-angiotensin system, and again these adrenal glands increase the secretion of this aldosterone, and this aldosterone decreased stimulates the decreased sodium excretion in the urine, and due to the decreased secretion in the urine, and the blood sodium levels can return to normal. So the sodium and the chloride both functions as electrolytes. They are important in maintaining the fluid balance. The sodium is important in the nerve function, muscle contraction, and the chloride, whereas is important in the hydrochloric acid, which is to maintain the gastric acid environment and the removal of carbon dioxide, and important in the immune function. So the deficiency is caused due to in children could be due to the diarrhea or vomiting, wherein lot of loss of sodium and chloride. That's why they give us oral ORS in order to supplement. And also athletes in various sports, athletes they have to consume the additional sodium, and the symptoms leads to nausea, dizziness, muscle cramps, and coma. So overconsumption of sodium may lead to increased blood pressure, and this many individuals such as the elderly people and the Africans are more susceptible to increased blood pressure. It may lead to hypertension, diabetes, and the chronic kidney problems. So the salt sensitivity can be affected by the exercise and genetics and responsiveness to the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. So the chloride it functions to maintain the acid base and the osmotic regulation. The hydrochloric acid, the chlorine salts are important in the gastric secretions, and their deficiency may lead, because of the increase in the pH may lead to alkalosis, where the pH goes up, and this can be due to increased bicarbonate compensates for the decrease of the chloride, and the growth retardation is also observed. Sulfur is also very important. It is a component of the amino acids, the cysteine, cysteine, and methionine for the bioactive and the structural proteins. The sheep wool contains about 4% of the sulfur, and the chondroitin sulfate is the constituent of the cartilage which requires the sulfate. So the cartilage biosynthesis. So also the deficiency is related to the protein deficiency. So with this, I stop the topic here, and we will cover the micronutrients later.